This is the Ramana Maharshi 40 Verses on Reality Satsang, a time for self-reflection and self-inquiry. Know yourself and be always free and at peace. Welcome. I'm Richard Clarke, hosting this satsang. I'm a seeker like you, sharing what we love. I've been blessed with years of deep teaching and practice, and I bring this to this satsang. This week's reading from 40 Verses on Reality is verse 40. Verse 24. Excuse me. The inert body does not say I. Reality consciousness does not emerge. Between the two, and limited to the measure of the body, something emerges as I. It is this that is known as Chit-jada-granthi, the knot between the conscious and the inert, and also as bondage, soul, subtle body, ego, samsara, mind, and so forth. The body does not say I. Being consciousness, the self, does not identify itself as an ego or a body. It's always free and untouched, always the knower. The metaphor of the knot between the conscious and the inert is used to describe what seems to tie the self to the body, to tie this open awareness to physical matter. This is how the vast absolute, being consciousness, can seem to manifest in a limited form like the body. What is this knot? It's entirely mental. It's the tangle of assumptions and ideas about who we are, what brings us happiness, what we are like, and what the world is like, ideas about other people and relationships, and on top of all of this, our own internal conditioning. All of this works together and determines how we feel and think about everything. Ramana said it's known also as bondage, soul, subtle body, ego, samsara, mind, and so forth. A lot of different words for the same thing. It's a big mess, an enormous knot tying together all of our ideas about ourselves and the world, all illuminated by the pure consciousness which we are, which is touched by none of it. The core, the center of this knot, what ties it all together, is the I thought, the idea that we exist as a separate entity. After the mind imagines the I thought, the mind organizes all the thoughts of everything else, others, the world, and some idea of a higher power, everything in relation to this imagined I. When the I thought dissolves, so does any sense of separation. The I and everything that depends on the I all fall together. What remains is what exists and can never be negated or removed. This existence consciousness bliss that you are. This is why Ramana's emphasis is on self-inquiry. Self-inquiry reveals the knowledge of who you are always, who you have been, and who you will always be. Who you are always does not come and go. There is no alternative to existence consciousness. You are that. Know that you are that. This sums up the entire teaching of Ramana Maharshi. Now, some ideas for practice. This, I thought, is your idea of your identity. It's formed by the assumptions you made early in your life about your apparent existence as a separate entity. Investigate within yourself. Is this idea of yourself always the same? Has it been different at one time of your life from another time? Is it present all of the time, every day? What about during deep sleep? There's no I thought in deep sleep, and people find deep sleep so refreshing. That this I thought ceases during deep sleep demonstrates that this idea of self, this ego, is not something that appears all the time. I wonder who I am when this I thought is not active. This is certainly a productive line of inquiry. Investigate within yourself if the I thought is not present always. What is here always? How can anything that comes and goes be my real identity? Do I come and go? Another productive line of inquiry. Ask, who am I? You know that you exist. You are not what is temporary. Just what is your real identity? What exists? Who exists? Who am I? Now, on to our videos for this week. First is Ādyaśakti, and he did a series, a similar series about the book that we're reviewing, and here is his talk on verse 24.
Namaste, and welcome to another episode of Upadesha Undiyar. Today we're going to talk about the I, the real I, and the false I. The insentient body does not say or feel I. Existence consciousness, Sat Chit, the real self, does not rise or subside. But in between the body and the real self, a limited I rises as the measure of the body. Consciousness, in the form I am this body, rises in waking and subsides again in sleep. Know that this I am the body consciousness is called by various names, such as the knot between consciousness and the insentient, Chit-jada-granthi, or Hridaya-granthi, bondage, bandha, the individual soul, jiva, the subtle body, sukshma sarira, ego, ahantai, and this mundane state of activity, samsara, and mind, manas. So, I always used to think, it's really amazing, it's really kind of strange that spirit, which is pure consciousness, can be in relation with or be conscious of this material existence, which is basically inert. They are so completely different in character, in their basic nature, and in their activities. So how is it that they can even be related to one another? Well, this is called the granthi, the knot. This very hard to explain, very hard to understand connection that ties these two completely dissimilar things together. So this knot is of the nature of ahankar, false ego. It says I am, but actually it is not. What is that? Well, it's called by many different names, but basically it's a measure of the body. It's like a status indicator. How am I doing? How's the body doing? Is it okay? And we measure the body against the body as it was in the past, or the body how we would like it in the future, or against other bodies. So in that way we get an indication of how we're doing. Are we doing okay? Are we in trouble? The mind is based on fear. Fear for the body. Is there anything in the present situation that resembles a previous situation in which there was some threat or some suffering in the body, some diminution of the body's condition or status? If so, then we better do something, we better have a plan, or we better take action. This is the mind. The mind is always worrying. What if this happens? What if that happens? Oh, what are we going to do, The mind is a worrywart. And it gossips too. The mind is full of all kinds of nonsense, verbal expressions, verbal knowledge, which it passes off as actual knowledge, but it isn't really knowledge because it's not based on experience. It's only based on words, in most cases heard from others. Heidegger called this idle talk, and it begins in the mind. The mind wants to pose as I, and it's based on identifying the body as I. But the body is basically just a piece of meat. I mean, it's a wonderful mechanism, and it's amazing in so many ways. But basically, it's just a machine. So there's nothing really too wonderful about the body. But what's really wonderful is the real self, the real I am. What does he call it here? Sat Chit, the real self, existence and consciousness. Real existence means eternal and unchanging. And real consciousness means always on. The self is always awake, always aware. Now, in deep sleep, there isn't anything for it to be aware of. But at all other times, the self is aware of the dreams in sleep and of the dreams while awaking. And the mind, this is what the mind is actually a dream. A dream that I am this body. Even though actually we have nothing whatsoever to do with the body. The body is just a piece of meat, and we are the actual living eternal self. So how is it that these two completely dissimilar things are connected? Well, this is called identification. Identification means that we identify or we take one thing to be something else. For example, taking the body to be the self, or taking the mind to be I. This is identification. And projection. Projecting our sense of I am on the body and mind, when it is obviously neither of them. I say obviously because if you actually look at your experience, it's clear that the mind and body are different from the self because they are not aware. The body is a biocomputer and the mind is another kind of computer, the subtle body, manomaya kosha. And they are responsible for certain functions, but you can't say that they're alive exactly. They're not conscious, they're not aware. And without awareness, what's the meaning of I? I is a symbol that means being aware. Without awareness, there is no I. There is no one to say I am. So, in other words, this idea of being an individual self based on the body is the essence of illusion. So, we call this the fall. The being falls from being the real I am into a condition of false I am. False identification with the mind and body. And this goes on and on until one takes to the path. Now the path is the exit from this improper, unhealthy, wrong condition and understanding. And it begins with education. It begins with learning. Not necessarily book learning, but learning about the real facts of life and acquiring what is called right view. So all the things that Ramana talks about in these verses are the pieces, the elements of right view. If one views the mind and body rightly, he won't say, I am the body. And he won't consider the mind to be the self. He'll accept only consciousness as the self. Now, does that really change anything? No. To know that will prevent us from making certain mistakes, and that's valuable. But it's only the beginning of self-realization. To actually attain self-realization, one has to meditate. And this is a process that, well, takes a whole lifetime, unless you're really fortunate and have already spent many lifetimes on the path. So what does meditation mean, actually? It means neti-neti. Looking at the contents of the mind that we normally identify as I, or project as I, and severing our link with them, stopping the identification, stopping the projection, and saying, no, this is not I. This is the mind, or this is the body, or this is some possession that I had identified with myself as part of I-making and mind-making. We went over that earlier. The Mula Pariyaya, the root sequence. We identify something as mine in order to base the inductive conclusion that I exists. I can say, oh yes, this is my body. Because this is my body, there must be an I who owns it. Well, there is really an I, but the real I doesn't have anything to do with the body. The real I is nothing but the awareness within. So how do we recognize, how do we realize this real I? Well, as I said, meditation is involved, and sometimes a little austerity is involved. Not too much austerity, huh? Don't go out of balance. But simply refrain from some of these identification activities for some time. So you can more easily realize that they are not the self. They are not I. The body is not the self. The mind is not the self. These thoughts, these identifications, these aren't the real self. The real self is something else. So what is that? Well, here's the kicker. This is the punchline to this video. The real self is not an experience. The real self is the experiencer, the one who is aware, not the things that one is aware of. So, what does that mean, actually? It means that when people have a so-called enlightenment experience, and then they say, okay, I'm enlightened, I had the experience. No, you're not enlightened because you had an experience. Experiences come and go. Even enlightenment experiences come and go. Okay, so you visited the top of the mountain. Huh? Right now, you go there, you wouldn't see anything. It's totally surrounded by fog. But on a clear day, you go up there and you can see very far, yes. But guess what? There's no food or water up there. You have to come down. Huh? So we may have a peak experience. And before, in our analysis of yoga, we found that you can reach samadhi based on any of the centers in the body. The Buddha talked about 84,000 Dharma doors. And what are they? They're the 84,000 nadis, or energy vortexes in the body. So based on those, you can leverage any one of those to reach samadhi. But you have to come out of samadhi. You can't live in samadhi. If you stay in samadhi, the body will die. And there is a class of enlightened people who just go into samadhi and don't come out, and they drop the body. But the original attainment of enlightenment is not based on samadhi. It's not based on any experience. Rather, it's based on recognizing who is actually the experiencer. Is it the body? No, because the body is just a piece of me. Is it the mind? No, because the mind is also just a machine, just a computer. So who is the experiencer actually? Is it this jiva? Is it this soul? All these different false entities that claim to be I? No, it's not any of those. It is only the real, unconditioned, objectless, non-dual awareness. I, the self, Brahman, not any individual. The minute you talk about an experience, you're talking about an individual. So that can't be enlightenment. That can't be self-realization. The real self-realization is when you realize who you really are. And then there's no more chasing these different experiences or identification with these alien things. The body, the mind, objects, experiences, the senses, memories, desires, all these things go away. Or they may still be there, but you don't think of them as I. The body is going to exist for a certain time, so okay, let's just ride it out. Let it do its thing for a few more years. But one who is self-realized knows well who he really is. Aham Brahmasmi. Om Tat Sat. Om Harihi Om.
And now we will hear from my teacher, Nome, with a talk on the mind.
The mind resolves itself in the self. The mind is dissolved. The mind is destroyed. These statements and one similar to them we find in the instructions given by the Maharshi, as well as strewn throughout the Upanishads and other scriptures. What is the mind? On the one hand, the Maharshi has said the mind is only a bundle of thoughts. And on the other hand, the Maharshi has said the mind simply does not exist. Regarding the latter instruction, he has said realizing the mind's non-existence is the direct path for all. What is the mind? When he said it is only a bundle of thoughts, it's to remove the false notion that there is a second knowing entity other than the infinite consciousness. The infinite consciousness in which there is no knower and known, no subject and object, which are illusions that appear only in the waking state of mind and the dreaming state of mind. When he said, this is the direct path for all, to realize the mind's non-existence. What else is this but the profound realization that there is no second identity, no second entity, and therefore no duality? That is, there is no one to say, I know the self, or I do not know the self. Regarded as a bundle of thoughts, the first thought, integrally connected to all the other thoughts, is the notion I. It is merely the barest assumption, hardly a thought. All the other ideas are based upon it. Or from another perspective, all the other ideas are just the idea of I in various guises. Therefore, the inquiry, who am I, puts an end to the mind by showing that it never actually exists. That which was never created is said to perish or dissolve. What else is that resolution, dissolution, or destruction but the knowledge of what is real, in which the unreal has never come to be? What else is loss of the ego but the realization that the self alone exists eternally? And there is nothing and no one else, ever. The reality that alone is, for which there is no alternative, for which there is no other, in which there is no differentiation, which is beginningless and endless, is truly called non-duality. Whether you comprehend what is being indicated or not, even now, what is it that so knows? I understand, I do not understand. What is it that knows this? To fathom the depths of your own identity, your own existence, you must inquire more deeply than the perceiving and the conceiving, the perceived and the conceived. For what you are in truth certainly cannot be a body or the senses. And it cannot be the mind or its thought forms. What is it that you call I? What is it that appears as a mind? Existence, which is invariably singular, which alone deserves the name I, what is its nature? The consciousness which is ever shining, synonymous with that existence, which always knows, but is never divided into triads of knower, knowing, and known. What is it? Can there be a mind in that? If all of illusion and its consequent bondage and suffering is just the delusion of the mind, yet the mind itself is found not to exist, what remains? Inquire within yourself to know the knower without superimposing any of the attributes of the known upon the knower. Self-luminous consciousness, self-known, hence self-knowledge, remains. You who are, however you imagine yourself to be, inquire as to who you are. Being, which is unborn and indestructible, utterly formless and undifferentiated, which always is, only as it is, remains as it always is. This we loosely refer to as self-realization. Yet who realizes what? Nevertheless, the falsely assumed ego or mind is nowhere to be found. Bondage is impossible, and immortal bliss is realized as the natural state.
All right. Now let us take a few minutes and meditate, inquire ourselves. Breathe in and out. Long, slow breaths. Feel the breath as it comes in, as it goes out. Now notice that you exist. You exist and you know that you exist. You don't have to think about it or feel it. You just know that you exist. And now investigate within yourself. Who am I when the mind is silent? Like meditation or samadhi or deep sleep. Who am I when the mind is silent? Do I come and go, or is this unitary existence consciousness always present? My mind comes and goes. Do I? Thoughts come and go. Does the knower of thought come and go? Who am I? What exists? Who exists? What is the nature of my existence? All right. Now let's close with a short chant. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om, peace, peace, peace. Thank you for letting me share this teaching with you. This series on Ramana Maharshi's 40 verses on reality will continue in the following weeks. If this satsang was of interest, I have more for you: a free book site, a YouTube site, and my blog. The URLs will be on screen next. Namaste.